Well, Jim, we return to the land of McMahon, episode 3 of the Netflix docuseries. Let's talk about it.
Well, boy, that was a quick introduction.
Well, this is the same show as the other ones. If you're on YouTube, this is part of a bigger show. This is all part of a bigger plot.
Yes, it's a bigger conspiracy. There's a whole fucking worldwide conglomeration joining into this thing. This is episode 3 of the 6-part, Jesus, Roots wasn't this long, documentary on Vince McMahon. The title of the episode, Screw Job. Sounds like a Quinn Martin production. Tonight's episode, Screw Job. And obviously with that title, Montreal is going to take some element of importance in this production here tonight, but they throw you a curve, wild card, bitches. They go back to 1984 to the first world title screw job.
85.
Well, that's what I said. They go back to 1985. That's what it was. Prick. With the first world title screw job, only it was the women's division. And they had to get the belt off Wendy Richter. We talked about this for some reason a year or two ago, didn't we?
I feel like we did, but I don't know why, because if Darkseid did something, I don't think it was that recent. And that would have been something that would have prompted that kind of discussion, but I can't.
Well, maybe it was. No, they did the show on Moolah, and maybe it was just longer ago. But basically, they start out with Wendy Richter as the champion, and she's done the Cyndi Lauper thing, the MTV thing, you know, the girl empowerment thing, whatever things were going on back over there. And then Vince says, well, it was fine for a while with Wendy as champion, but then she became a problem. Which was, as we recalled at the time, whenever that time was, she wouldn't sign a new contract with, like, before she went out, right? That was the story that we had pretty much concurred upon. Was the way it happened was they were bugging her to sign a new contract. She was wanting more money because she was featured on all the magazine covers and everything. She was the female Hulk Hogan. Now, there would still be a massive pay discrepancy in being any other Hulk Hogan but the Hulk Hogan. But Vince wanted her to sign when she went out in the garden that night. Before she went out, and she wouldn't do it. And so the Spider Lady, instead of being, normally it was Judy Martin, right? But in this case, it was the fabulous Moolah.
Yeah, and that's part of the story I think needs to be said. The idea that Wendy Richter didn't know it was Moolah is ridiculous, because she was trained by Moolah, and once you got in there with Moolah, you knew it was not Judy Martin.
Well, and that's the thing. Wendy, you know, I haven't seen Wendy in 40 years or so, but at the time, you know, you could say, oh, she's protecting the business. I'm wondering, is she still trying to protect the business in her own way when she's, well, Cyndi Lauper called me to ask me to be, you know, her wrestler. And, well, I didn't know it was Moolah. She was under a mask, even though that Moolah's fucking satchel ass alone was somewhat of a giveaway. Is she still kind of protecting the business in some fashion, she thinks, or has she said that so many times she doesn't want to admit she was bullshitting now, and she still says it?
I don't know. And again, you know, they played it and they replayed it, so you kind of get to see her reaction with the referee and her yelling at him.
Who was a commission referee, by the way. He wasn't even one of the referees that would have been traveling with the WWF across the country. He was a goddamn New York commission referee, like about 70 years old, and just like, what the fuck am I? What is this?
That was the guy that refereed the midget matches at the Garden. You know what I mean? Like, that was the guy that they sent for that. No, but obviously the screw job was in, and she didn't fully appreciate what it was. It's a ridiculous 3 count. Even Gorilla Monsoon on commentary is like, what was that?
Well, yeah, but it was a last minute probably Vince told Moolah, say, well, if she doesn't sign this thing, just, you know, take it back, right? But at the same time, there's Moolah 50-something years old. Even if she was a salty old broad, as they used to say back in the day, Wendy was like, what, 25 or whatever, and pretty fucking tall and rangy. She kicked out of the small package because even if she didn't know that was coming, when Moolah just kind of grabbed her and small packaged her, you can tell if somebody cinches up on it or not. And you've got, you got a chance, you got a second or so to. But anyway, she kicked out and they counted it anyway. And then they had the awkward tug of war with the belt. And it was the sloppiest double cross in the history of wrestling. And Moolah wanted to prance around and fucking celebrate. And Wendy's trying to half-ass, should I hit this old bitch or will she fucking hand me my ass? What the fuck is going on here? Because Wendy was not in the business long enough to get real smart to it at that point in time anyway.
If she had given her a field goal kick to the pussy, it would have gotten the biggest pop in the history of the Garden.
But that's just the noise it would have made when she drew her foot back out. We're talking about the fans now. So, I knew we'd find some kind of entertainment in this episode. So anyway, but the point was the way that Vince tells it, she was fine for a while. She became a problem. When it was time to do the honors, he'd always, again, the same terminology later on. And whenever somebody didn't want to do a job, he would always subtle heel them to other people by saying, well, he didn't want to do the honors, which makes you sound like a real prick, right? And he said, it's my belt. I'll make you give it up then. And that's what they did. But the most, not telling thing, but the most pertinent thing to a Vince documentary in this particular story was the one quote he had. He said, get the match in the ring. And I think we've talked about this before. That was Vince Sr.'s philosophy. When people are arguing about when you've got something advertised as a promoter, especially as the promoter of the Pope of Madison Square Garden, a big fucking deal. When you've got something advertised, get the match in the ring. If they're bitching about the finish, find some way to smooth it out, work it out, or even just get it in the ring and see what's going to happen, but get the match in the ring. That was Vince Sr.'s motto, one of them. And that's what Vince Jr. would do. And he did it again.
He did it to the Warrior. Remember, he did it to the Warrior.
Did it to the Warrior.
SummerSlam 91, Warrior wanted more money. He wanted the same deal as Hogan. And Vince felt he had to at least kind of agree to it just to get him into the match. And then he, according to Vince, fired him as soon as he came back through the curtain.
Yeah. It's okay when the bell is about to ring. And once the bell has rung to end it, fuck you, you're fired.
Hey, by the way, when you hear stuff like this, you can't blame Jeff Jarrett for holding him up for money before he dropped the belt to China.
Well, exactly. And because Jeff knew what the fuck was going on, and because he'd been around for a while in his family. And that's what Vince's, this little piece on, Wendy and that moral of that story was Vince said, there's nothing I wouldn't do for our business.
For his business.
Well, he said for our business. But there's nothing that he wouldn't do for our business as long as our is mostly he or I or pronouns, pal, whatever the fuck. And then they went back to where they had been previously on our episode number 2, where they're still in the middle of the steroid trial and the fallout, the testimony, blah, blah, blah. And they told a story of Hulk. The government apparently thought that he was going to corroborate all this stuff. It was they gave him immunity. Then he testified that he was with Vince every step of the way. He worked the government because he said, I told him what they wanted to hear, and then I told the truth.
Do you think when they gave him immunity, he thought it applied to the rest of his life?
I'm not sure.
That's why he says everything he says now.
I don't know.
I've got immunity.
Well, see, the thing is, you don't have immunity. You don't need immunity from just being a bullshit artist. It's only if it's criminal activity.
They should have changed it from the immortal Hulk Hogan to the immune Hulk Hogan.
The immune Hulk Hogan.
It would have worked well. There's still time.
And I'm sure he'll need it. But But that's the thing is that, he told him, oh, yeah, give me immunity. I'll spill the bill. He gave him immunity. And he said, well, here's the beans. Nothing. So that's how he got out of that. And then, but at the same time, as we've talked about, there wasn't a case for Vince distributing steroids, especially not only the jurisdictional thing you pointed out, but Tony Atlas said, he let us do it. He never told us to do it. And Bret Hart, who's very blunt, said it was just common sense. Who's in the fucking main event, right?
Once Vince came back from that Caribbean vacation showing us the photos, we said, oh, shit, this guy's in the bodybuilding.
Yeah. He looks better than we do. We got to do something about this. No, that's the thing is that, and I've said this for 30 years or however long it's been, he wasn't telling guys individually, sitting them down, okay, you got to get on this and that and the other thing and do this. Again, there might be the allusion to, work out, look at your body, you look like shit, whatever. But you could see who was getting the jobs, who was being pushed, what the look was. And so you'd have to be an idiot. And then there were still some idiots that still figured it out. Not figure it out.
Do you think they did a good enough job pointing out that Vince, when he went national, the big thing, it wasn't really a style difference as much as a look difference. Everyone getting pushed started to be guys that were all pumped up. You didn't have that everywhere else.
Well, and no, they didn't really bring that up because they spent a lot of time early on talking about him signing the guys that were popular in key markets, which he did. But then, remember, didn't he sign the fucking Crusher? Or am I just imagining it? He got Mad Dog.
He signed anyone he could to hurt Vern Gagne.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone who got signed to be a commentator, signed. Anyone who got a gig to be a commentator on AWA TV got signed by Vince.
But that's the thing is that, some of those guys...
Yeah, because Crusher teamed with Hogan at one point. In the WWF.
In Milwaukee. And that's what he needed, but Crusher nationwide, because he was almost 60, and Mad Dog was almost 60, and the Wrestling 2 was almost 60, but he got him for Atlanta. But those guys were, short-lived because they were at the end of their careers and a brand new audience said they didn't have time. If I only had time. But with a lot of the guys that he kept, it was big, it was the look, right? And then the guys that started going there, he immediately saw, shit, look at me next to this guy. I got to do something. So that, yeah. But there was no memo from Vince. Get on the sauce. Or did you get that memo?
I didn't get that memo. That wasn't part of my collection.
I think it was gravy he was talking about with you instead of I got the gravy memo.
Well, I think that one of the issues with the trial wasn't a memo. Wasn't there a quote from like Pat Patterson to someone like the boys need their candy?
The boys need their candy.
Or was that in a memo? Was it in a memo to Linda or something? The boys need their candy.
Somebody, he didn't write it in a memo, but somebody referred to him saying that in a memo. I believe it was. Anyway.
Do you think enough people talk about the fact that Dr. Zahorian looks like Mark David Chapman?
No, you know what?
He doesn't he?
I swear to God, I hadn't seen him in so long and really paid any attention that now that you look back in hindsight, yes, he kind of did. I wonder where he was a few years earlier.
I don't know.
Maybe they got the wrong guy.
We have an interview on 605 way back with Mike Mittman, who worked for the Athletic Commission. He's the one who brought Dr. Zahorian. He's the one who introduced him to the wrestlers.
How long did he get for that? 3 to 5?
No, he's still out there. He's still out there having a good time.
Walking around loose, huh?
Well, yeah, he's an older man now. But back to Vince. Speaking of older man.
Wheeling around loose then. And so, of course, the verdict was not guilty. And surprise, surprise. But then they started moving on with talking about how Vince was moving on. And, because... Again, 92 or whatever that was, business started going in the tubes. It was okay in 93 when I got there. I'm not saying anything one had anything to do with the other, but business to me was okay at that point. but they were still on the downhill slide of the fallout from the steroids and the Ring Boys and the Donahues and remember they had that odd cast of characters that Vince had been talked into hiring in the office through Linda to bring respectability, and that Lisa Wolf and the human relations department, why can't I ever say it? Human resources. And who was that? Osbert d'Arce, some fucking con man that they had hired that supposedly was going to try to help them be more business oriented and run this thing like a real company, Pinocchio, because they'd gotten so much trouble.
You know, they didn't really talk about it. And again, for a documentary series called Mr. McMahon, where he's saying they conflated Mr. McMahon with Vince McMahon, they didn't really talk a lot about him outside of work at all. And
what is there to talk about?
I don't know.
When can you find that instance?
Well, we can now find it in an affidavit or whatever the fuck was filed with the court from Janelle Grant. That's what he does at home apparently now.
Well, that shit wasn't going on there because Linda was in the house.
Well, you don't know what was going on where, but the second thing is, Linda, we could talk in a later episode about how they haven't done anything to evaluate that relationship where it is now. But this period of time is the first time that in a lot of ways Linda helped bail out the company by being a public face of the company. When they needed Vince to step down, at least publicly, Linda took over the corporate duties. And all of a sudden, it was her doing corporate interviews and stuff on behalf of WWF. And I think that was one of the big benefits to Vince, was she was able to soften a lot of the blow.
Well, yeah, that... but see, when you put it like that...
Your filthy mind. I didn't put it anyway.
With what's going on here. See, we're seeing odd meanings and everything now, but Linda was the most normal, boring, lady. It perfect for something like that, because you got this fucking madman's liable to say or do anything, depending on, obviously, what the situation is. And he's just gotten off of a federal trial. So, well, here's this kindly middle-aged woman over here running this family business. So it did that. But at the same point, all of these fucking people that they hired to make them look like a normal company in the business end of it and all this, they ended up either getting fired, being screwy, or stealing from them, and I think potentially going to jail. I think that was at the merchandise guy. What was his name? God damn it.
Oh, I just saw that episode of The Toys That Made Us on Netflix about that, and they said the guy's name. I can't remember it now.
Jim Bell. Was that it?
Sounds like it could be right.
Jim Bell. Well, if it's not, then fuck him. He's probably dead now because he had to be almost 50, 30 years ago. So anyway, back to Vince. So then they talked about, well, they tried to replace Hulk Hogan with Lex Luger, the body and the look, but Lex didn't connect with people in that spot. As we mentioned before, he was more natural heel, blah, blah, blah. But Bret Hart is fucking great. He said, the guy that pulled the sword out of the stone was Bret Hart.
And by the way, they left out a big part of that story. It wasn't Hogan the Luger. After Hogan left, after the Warrior and Davey Boy were suspended,
yeah,
that's right around the period of time where Bret was made the champion, and he was establishing himself as the champion when all of a sudden Hogan came back for WrestleMania 9, and at the end of the show, surprise, they put the belt on him right after Yokozuna beat Bret.
And then, surprise, surprise, Hogan goes away again, and the fireball from the photographer, right?
Right.
And Yoko was the champion again. And then here I came, because they're like, Jesus Christ, now we need somebody to talk for this guy. But anyway, I just love the terminology from Bret, the guy that pulled the sword out, because they had tried a number of things. And finally, Bret, the second time around there, caught on because he made a great point. With the bad publicity on the wrestling business, the scandals and whatever, they knew he wasn't going to get fucking busted with a a dead girl or a live boy in his hotel room, or a pound of cocaine in the trunk of his car, or whatever the fuck. He wasn't a steroid abuser. And it was a new generation. It was new talent. Now they had to do something with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon, Diesel, and Undertaker was still fresher at that point. But that's another reason that Bret, I'm pretty sure, got it before Michaels did, because they couldn't take a chance on. Even Vince is like, well, we just got out of a bunch of fucking hot water. We're going to put the belt on this fucking guy at this point. So,
well, Bret was more established. He was established first as a singles, but secondly, when Bret lost the belt in between, I guess Yokozuna's run until WrestleMania, Shawn walked out or got fired, whatever happened at that point, suspended, and they had to have a new Intercontinental Champion. So it wasn't like there already weren't a lot of problems with Shawn.
Yeah. So, but anyway, because they started talking about how, Turner began taking the talent, or Turner Entertainment, TBS. We don't want to gloss over poor Eric. He gets mad when it's Turner mentioned instead of him.
Well, no, because he's right. Because Vince McMahon's obsessed with Ted Turner, and Ted Turner never has uttered the name Vince McMahon and cared about it at all. But they literally had footage I'd never seen of Ted Turner laughing at the Billionaire Ted skits.
Yes, I didn't know they ever shot any of that stuff. But yeah, but see, that's the thing. To Vince, it had to be billionaire against billionaire. And once again, Vince, a brilliant marketer, even with somebody he's in a real life shoot with, he changes the narrative. Perception is reality. To it's me versus Ted Turner because he's a billionaire. Bischoff was a job guy at that point in Vince's mind. He's not over. People don't know who he is. But Turner was taking the talent. There went Savage after Hulk. And then they told a story. They got the primetime time slot. And Luger walks out on the first Nitro. I think in hindsight, it does look a little cheesy for people not aware of what the situation was at the time, that they did their first primetime show in a fucking mall next to a Service Merchandise, I think, or whatever the fuck that store was. But Vince, then, did you catch what he said about Luger walking out on the first Nitro?
I don't remember the exact quote. What was it?
He said, I had handshakes with these guys.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yes, all those years I had handshakes. And no, not for the previous 10 fucking years you hadn't. See, and that's the thing. Part of it is he remembers the way things were at one time. He might not have a great spatial ability to put them in chronological order. But Luger had been under contract. First, he had him under contract to the World Bodybuilding Federation. We just talked about that, so he'd get him away from WCW after Luger had a car wreck. And then the reason why Luger was able to walk out was because his contract had expired and they were still talking, and Vince was so sure of himself that Luger had assured him that he wasn't going anywhere. I can't remember what the deal or what the details were that they were working on. It wasn't even like money. It was some minute shit that in hindsight was Luger letting his fucking deal or working his deal to run out so that he could be free by saying, oh, Vince, let's work, just on the travel. Can I get business class? Whatever the fuck it was, right? But so it was Vince's, and it's happened to me. When you believe any one of these guys, even the people you think, oh, I wouldn't believe anybody, but I'll believe that, whatever. But that's what happened. That's why Luger was able to walk out there, because he ran his contract out. And he had convinced Vince that, oh, there was no problem. We just got to work on this other fucking thing. And that used to happen back in those days because the legal department consisted of people that would, prepare all the contracts that Vince and or the head of talent relations told him to goddamn prepare. It wasn't like there was full staffs doing nothing but monitoring these guys and their dates and their rollovers and all that shit. But no, that was the thing with Luger, and everybody was, dumbfounded when he came out in the mall.
You can't blame him. Again, Vince, this episode's screw job. It's about how Vince screwed over talent whenever he felt he wanted to for his business. Lex Luger's business was Lex Luger. He did the right thing for himself.
And
at the end of the day, Vince was never going to do the right thing for him. It's going to be about Vince.
Well, and that's the thing, is that Vince was playing the victim here with Turner signing the guys away, which is the same thing that he did. And then in one of these other episodes, we've been going back and forth, watch, record. But in one of these other episodes, they really delve into it. A lot of the times he would do the same thing to the territory people in the past that he was then claiming that Turner or WCW or TBS or whatever was doing to him. And whether it be stealing talent or, predatory business practices.
As soon as someone with more money, I mean, that was his whole business model, was I'll use as much money as I can, even if I don't have it, to steal everyone's talent.
But if somebody has more money, then that's not fair.
Right.
And that's where Eric Bischoff was. And again, Eric was one of the. There was a couple people on here that you could tell, well, I'll say what I think. And if they don't want to fucking give me a job again or book me for a signing or whatever, I don't care. Because Eric was a little, prickly about some of the things here that you would think might have chapped Vince's buttocks. But he was talking about WCW becoming a more adult and more reality-based product. And that phrase kind of takes a bad rap, because our friend Shitstain, Mr. Russo, for the sake of any of the new listeners, would say that that's what he was trying to do with his rotten, crummy booking. Reality-based. There was absolutely nothing either reality-based or believable or even spelled properly in any of his writing, but he called it that. Eric was talking a more reality-based in terms of opening up. Once again, everybody's wanting to open up and admit that everything's a work at a show, but what's real and what's not, to blah, blah, blah. But I told Vince the same thing when I started on the creative team in February 1996, right? My first week. I said, reality-based as far as what is believable in your... They want to call it a WWE universe now. We didn't have that term then. But in your universe of logic, in your program, what would be real and what would be bullshit? Be reality. I use cops as an example. And so, when they fucking find the perp and pull him out of the car and they start hammering him with the fucking flashlight, there's not a goddamn camera inside the car getting another viewpoint, and you kind of believe everything's really going on. It's not so slick, but there's more real heat. I think that is what WCW had over WWF at the time, because of Vince's insistence on still being, the land of the gobbledygooker. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
I do. And, if you think about the Hogan turn in 96, it happened in Florida on a WCW show. If that had taken place in the Northeast or in California on a WWF show, would the reaction have been the same? There still were different fan bases for different companies.
Oh, yeah. And the WWF fan base at that point, the reason why from 94-ish and 5-ish there was very few of them is because, good Lord, not only now had Vince lost a number of his most prominent stars of the previous period, but that was some silly ass shit. I mean, Yoko was the champion for much of that. He wasn't out there being silly. Brett was the champion for some of that. He wasn't out there being silly, but there was a lot of silly shit. And, you know, that's, again, Bruce would do what Vince likes to do. And I think Pat had kind of hit a bit of a wall there with just they were amusing themselves. But no, there was no oomph to it. There was no goddamn that, you know, the Bret Hart, Steve Austin kind of thing you'd get in 97. There was none of that in 95. So anyway, that's what real or reality based is to me, is that type of thing that you can, okay, in this program that I'm watching, these people legitimately mean what they're fucking doing. And holy shit, that kind of actually might not have been supposed to happen. That type of thing. But Vince was always, you know, when you would pitch him something, it'd sound like old Southern wrestling to try to make people believe. I said the same thing the other day with the Punk interview. If you know the movie is fake, does that mean De Niro and Pacino aren't still trying? Or I don't get that. But anyway, they made a point that they finally made Vince sell something, as they said, when they, you know, Medusa threw the belt in the trash and Bischoff was giving out the results of Raw, and finally he came back with the Billionaire Ted skits and okay Koplovitz. Where do they get these fucking names? She should have changed her name before she got in show business. But Kay Koplovitz made him stop, the network executive, because I guess that they were either friends or just they felt it was unseemly for the one cable network to be parodying another head of another cable network in such a demeaning fashion.
You don't see that. You don't usually see cable channels attack one another on the air.
Well, it's about goddamn time then, wasn't it? Anyway, I like the Billionaire Ted stuff. Just, you know, it was goofy.
It's horrible
segments. I know.
How much did they cost? No, whatever.
Well, you know, no. I got to say this now. That's one thing. You can't blame them for wasting money when they just had, because I think, I can't remember everybody was in the room at the time, but most of those people actually worked in the office or the studio and they just put wigs on them and they were in a fucking room. Remember, it was in TNA, which in no way, shape, or form had the finances of the WWF. They made Shark Boy a goddamn fish tank he could live in. Remember?
That's right. I remember you telling me about it. I never saw it, thankfully.
Yeah, well, no, he didn't have you over.
Guess not.
I get, or maybe it would have. He didn't have you under.
I didn't watch TNA. I was smart.
Well, you know, every time a hook would come down from the ceiling, that would mean it was time to leave the dinner party. All right. So, speaking of leaving the party, that's what Hall and Nash did. And I remember, again, and I've told this story, I'm not going to we've got hours of this thing to go. I'm not going to get sideways. But what Hall and Nash did was, I think it was probably after WrestleMania 96, sometime in April, were we in Omaha, Des Moines, not Kansas City, but some kind of depressing Midwestern location. And their contracts were coming up, and the creative team had been asking Vince, what's going on? Well, we're going to get some definitive answers there, pal. And he talked to both of them there and came out of the meeting, said, okay, both Hall and Nash are staying. All right, so they're staying. Now we know what we're doing. And then immediately we got back to Connecticut, and one guy called him on the phone and the other guy sent him a letter by fax saying, no, we're leaving. And that was not to me, it was not ever, because let's face it, we did better once we got rid of them, and they did better once they got there. So everybody was happy. But why tell the guy, oh, I'm with you? I think it was Hall that Vince told me, told Bruce, told Jim Ross. Hall said he's going to get up in the locker room and tell everybody in front of all of them that I'm the one that made him what he is today, and he would never think of leaving. Except when he...
That's a line of bullshit. How could Vince even believe that? Would you have believed that?
Well, it was kind of true. He was fucking underneath preliminary fucking musclehead in WCW before Vince had him be Razor. Yeah, they weren't going to let him be Razor because they hadn't thought of Razor.
The idea that he was going to stand up and give this speech before the locker room putting over the company. You believe that?
Vince believed it. I wasn't in the conversation. I didn't believe Hall or Nash as far as I could throw their respective fucking houses.
And I'm going to the Luger argument. They got deals that set them up for life. I mean, you know, again, how do you compete? It's like competing with Tony Khan now. He could just throw so much money against you.
Well, yes, but that's why I would have said, Vince, I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry, but $1 million or whatever the fuck it is. I don't know what to tell you. Thank you for everything. I'm going to buy you a goddamn new Jeep. Whatever the fuck. Just like shit stain. Don't call the guy on the phone when he's just landed back from another fucking country when he's at a building 40 miles from your fucking house. Go down there and tell him, hey, I'm leaving. They're going to give me a ridiculous amount of money. And I don't know what else to tell you, but thank you. But don't, anyway. So they left. Wherever it was, Omaha, Des Moines, whatever the fuck. And then they did the curtain call, and they all tried to explain the curtain call. And, of course, Undertaker hated it, and Bret Hart hated it. You can tell who really gave a shit about the business and wasn't falling for this delusion they have in their head that they're all fucking movie stars and entertainers by who liked it and who didn't like it.
What do you think of Vince's reaction?
I've given up trying to figure out what they pitched him, what he agreed to, what they ended up doing, why he wasn't upset about it afterwards. Until everybody else got upset. He wasn't really pissed off about it afterwards. And Jerry Briscoe, I remember, threw his fucking, wasn't a suitcase, but a big old satchel bag halfway down the hallway at Madison Square Garden. I was kicking mine. These fucking imbeciles. But anyway, that's where they tried to explain kayfabe. With the curtain call thing and what they had done and how it wasn't done at the time. And I think Undertaker probably not understood it, but explained it, conveyed it best. He was always, even if you knew his bullshit, he was trying to create doubt in people's heads, which is intrigue, which leads to interest. Does that guy think he's the Undertaker? Maybe there is no fucking Undertaker, but does the guy think he's a fucking, is he all there? Look at this fucking guy. So that's, there's Triple H calling, well, kayfabe is kind of this antiquated thing. Bah. You just got to be friendly to the kids. Unfortunately, Michael said, well, I didn't know why kayfabe was so important, and he's the one teaching the kids, which is why a lot of the guys get into business these days with fucked up attitudes. Did David Copperfield, when he was selling out arenas, when he was the biggest magician in the world in the 80s, I've got a goddamn program from a David Copperfield show that looks like it's from a Rolling Stone show. This guy was making fucking money. Did he have to bring out the woman that he sawed in half to explain to the audience how that her intestines remained unharmed and they really enjoyed working together on that illusion? Or could he just let the people wonder how that he did it? Do you see what I'm saying here?
Yeah, and I guess also there's different levels of kayfabe. Kayfabe in front of the camera, when you're watching a wrestling show, I think it's a necessity. The world has to exist in the world of kayfabe. The world of kayfabe can exist in the real world, but this specific show, this hour, 2 hours, is in the world of kayfabe. And then there's kayfabe when the cameras aren't on. outside the arena and everything. Like, this wasn't the Clique hanging out in New York City and people snap photos. This was combining the two areas of kayfabe and destroying both. And it was and kayfabe is a necessity for a wrestling television show in America. I'm sorry, it is.
There you have it. But of course, Triple H was the one whose head rolled over it, because as I've said 10 million times, what's he going to do to Hall and Nash? And Michaels was the champion. So, but it ended up that they sold Vince a lot of he wasn't going to do it right then, but they were insidiously earworming into his brain. The world is changing. They all know. And so that he'd eventually open up, even more than he already had with its entertainment. And the product, regardless what you say about the business, the product never recovered. Because remember, we've talked about this from about that period. In the next 5 years or so, anything after that, it's few and far between that it has not only the aggression in the ring and the appearance of chaos and mayhem, but that the people are not going as batshit either because of that. So, and they can make money, and they're certainly doing it now, but the actual product that is being perpetrated has never gotten past this generation that don't realize that it's wrong to let everybody know exactly what you did about everything. But they make a lot more money off of fewer people individually now. And they better be glad of that, because they've lost about 8 million. Anyway, back to this. There was the story they were telling about Vince crying, predatory business practices when Bischoff mocking him for it. Billionaire Ted trying to run us out of business, our small family business, when he had done the same thing in '84 with the territories. And Vince was there with, some attempt to justify it with twisted logic. And meanwhile, down south, they've started the Outsiders. They've turned Hogan heel. And, when Vince said he never considered a heel Hulk Hogan, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because if he'd have done it, it'd have been the biggest popcorn fart in the history of the world, because Hogan in the WWE wouldn't have worked as a heel. They were just tired of him. And it at that time, with all the silliness, he couldn't have that new audience that was already predisposed to dislike him, because the remnants of WCW was Flair country. So you had a base of fuck you, Hogan, just anyway. And then he had the guys to fucking stand in the middle of with Hall and Nash, and it all worked. But it wouldn't have worked if Vince had done it. Would it?
Again, Vince had amazing successes with things that he supervised, but there's also a lot of misses, a lot of things that worked in other places that Vince couldn't replicate because he couldn't leave things alone. He had to put his spin on it. I don't think it would have been able to play out as well as it did in WCW under Vince. Not in 1996.
Yeah, no.
And not at any time, after 1992. I don't think so.
And so that ran the win streak of WCW to 83 weeks. I keep hearing that number. But Bischoff got it. That's where he was talking about it, as we mentioned earlier. Vince could be, in his mind at least, if not in maybe his fans' minds, the sympathetic babyface against Ted Turner. And Bruce said Vince never considered Bischoff. He talked about Ted Turner. That was to not only elevate Vince, because everybody had heard of Ted Turner, whether you're a wrestling fan or not. That elevated Vince into being in a rivalry with a fucking major league celebrity and, business person. But also that way he could be the sympathetic babyface, because Turner had so much money and had fucked so many women and etc. that people were kind of jealous of him at the time. So, blah, blah, blah. And Bischoff gets that. So what'd you think about his audition video as an announcer?
Oof. I mean, he wasn't a very good commentator ever. In the AWA, he was fine as an interviewer, but as a commentator, he wasn't good. In WCW, he wasn't good. When he took over and when he had Nitro and he made himself the commentator, wasn't very good.
Well, see,
he became good actually when he became a heel commentator, because then it worked, because that was his natural self.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is he knew almost nothing about wrestling. When he got the job with Vern, he knew nothing about wrestling. And he couldn't be expected to be an announcer calling holes and get, all the, natural things you've got to just instinctive is what I'm trying to say. He couldn't do that, but he's a salesman and he's glib and he can talk extemporaneously, which means off the cuff for the kids out there. And that's what he's good at. So doing interviews or sales pitches for the, hey, Tuesday night, we're going to be back at the St. Paul Civic Center type of thing. He's fucking great. And also, and you've won a brand new car. So he could do that stuff too.
No, he wasn't very good at that though. He wasn't good at getting the enthusiasm and seeming genuine with it. He couldn't do that.
I don't know. I've always thought that he was a good enough con man that he could fake that enthusiastic genuineness.
Bischoff is a good con man talking to you one-on-one or on the mic selling a concept. But as a host, as someone who needs to bring the excitement, as an MC, no way.
Someone who needs to bring the excitement.
No way. He can't do it. He doesn't seem natural. John Davidson seemed natural. Bischoff doesn't.
Well, all right then. That's why John Davidson got all the big jobs.
The new Hollywood Squares.
So then we finally get to Montreal. Vince makes the deal with Brett for 20 years. And again, they've done movies and documentaries and written books on this whole one thing here.
And they still got it wrong.
Well, yeah, and they skipped almost.
They still got it wrong.
Well, I don't know that you can say they got it wrong, because I don't know if there was a goddamn detail in here. I don't know if they got it right, but they didn't get anything wrong because they didn't really tell you anything.
By not saying that Vince and Bruce Pritchard and anyone who says any of the things they say are lying about this, that's getting it wrong, because Brett had creative control. Brett was willing to lose the title to anyone else. Brett couldn't debut on WCW the next day with the belt. I mean, there were so many different things that the WWE side is always trying to avoid because their story doesn't hold up. It was just pure and simple. Vince wanted to screw Brett. He didn't have to. It wasn't, I have to get the belt because otherwise Wendy Richter will run into a cab. Like, it wasn't that. It was, I'm going to screw him over.
A cab will run into Wendy Richter.
This was more about sending some kind of weird statement, because Brett was willing to do it for... If you had asked Brett to do a job in Montreal to The Undertaker, do you think it would have been a problem?
No. Well, that's what I'm saying, folks. If you want to hear what we have to say about Montreal, I think we got an omnibus on the YouTube channel.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
But they went through this in 5 minutes or whatever. Brett said Sean was a real dick. And then Sean said, I was such a prick. And Bruce knew nothing. Brett was expecting something. Vince called for the bell and Brett wrecked the place and spit on him. And then Brett asked Sean if he knew, and Sean said, as God is my witness, I didn't know, right? And then right afterwards, he said, of course, Vince made us not tell. And then Vince owed Brett one, so he went over and Brett knocked him out. And
listening to Brett tell the story about how perfect the punch was. Bret Hart stole the show in this whole thing.
Yeah. But it may have been petty theft in this episode.
He's so blunt in everything he says.
And honestly, again, that's what it... I think Vince somehow was... See, I can't psychoanalyze people like Heyman. It's almost like he's spent a lot of time on the couch and heard the psychoanalyst psychoanalyze. But
everyone always said that Heyman's like the northern you and you were the southern Heyman. I think it's more him and Bruce Pritchard. They spin the same kind of shit, but Heyman's just a lot better at it.
Oh, Heyman's glorious. But to try to psychoanalyze this, somehow Vince in his mind said it will make me the baby face, the sympathetic figure, the man, my dick will be larger, whatever in his head makes him happier about himself if he went over there so that Brett could hit him, because he figured Brett was probably going to hit him. Or fight him or whatever the fuck. And that's why he went over there, because he had to, go and be a man about it so that he could actually go and later on and say I was a man about it. But the story that I heard also, it wasn't like that he stood there and went, okay, I'm putting my hands behind my back.
Right.
Well, no, from the people in the room at the time, they suddenly, Brett charged toward him and they locked up. And like Brett said, they, not in a full referee's position, collar and elbow, but they locked up like two people about to have a fight, and people surged around him, and Brett had one time for one fucking shot and he landed it. But that was the deal. But I think some people have thought that Vince was standing there like going, go ahead, I can take it. But anyway, and then they tease that, now Mr. McMahon will emerge. And that was the end of episode number 3.
It's just weird the way it bounces over stuff and past stuff, and then it focuses on other things. But it's like, again, it's never about Vince McMahon. After the show ended, he went back to the hotel, he had a drink, and he thought about things. Like, it's never that. It's always just, here's what you saw on TV, and here's what you saw in other documentaries. And here
but also, I see what they're doing. In some cases, they're going back, like for the next episode, they will start with the influence of Dr. Jerry Graham on a teenage Vince McMahon, and then they'll, come back to the modern time, or they'll go back to the way he's utilized and/or, taken some of utilized his family members and taken some weird positions toward his family members on television. And there'll be some kind of overall theme of the piece, but you're right. But there's no
substance. Not substance, but there's nothing that like.
No, I see what you're trying. I'm trying to verbalize it also, but there's no. You see a picture of Vince once having taken a vacation, but there's nobody from his life that's like, yeah, shit, me and Vince, we used to fucking go down and go fishing, because there is nobody.
Well, but there are some people, like, Brad Baluchian, who did the Six-Pack, he interviewed Jim Troy and other people. Jim Troy worked with Vince at Cape Cod, went to work for WWF. They were a friend inside and outside the office. Like, there were people around Vince.
But I think that's the most recent one, and that was 40 years ago.
Well, actually, no, the most recent one is probably that personal trainer that he hangs out with.
Oh, well.
I'm serious, though. I know that his name's in the lawsuit, but that's who he hangs out with. His handlers.
And you had to say hang out.
He hangs out with his handlers, and also
And handlers. See, every word you say.
And the physical therapist guy, or the physical therapist guy worked for the other doctor. But again, Vince has a clique outside of work, is my point.
Well, apparently we found it, but they're all under indictment, or unindicted co-conspirators, or whatever they're fucking called. But yeah, and nobody was here to say in the, as it progresses from start to finish, there was nobody really here to say, well, when the IPO happened and he became a billionaire for real, his behavior really started getting bizarre.
What has Linda brought to this? I mean, again, it's about who's interviewing you and what kind of questions they're asking and what you'll say, but we're not finding about out about anything about Vince the Man at all, other than, and he says, don't confuse the character with that. How are we supposed to think of you otherwise? There's no life.
Did they ask Linda, okay, when you were 15 and he was 17 or whatever, and you went to the Tasty Freeze, what did he order? Was he, because there's pictures of him as a young man, he still apparently found the physical culture, but he was some fucking abused child in a trailer park up until he was 12, so he couldn't have been on the finest nutrition and had a Joe Weider barbell set from the time he was 4. Well, formulative things in his life, you were around for some of them? What?
Anything. When they went bankrupt.
Yes.
When they went bankrupt in the 70s, did we hear anything about that?
And that's so. Bruce could have told the story about he was on his way to the bankruptcy fucking court proceeding, and he went and spent $50 for a fucking manicure. And because, well, you can't fucking go and look like a savage.
I didn't know about this.
Yes, he wanted to make sure he presented the proper image when he went into bankruptcy court. But I mean, I see what you're saying. But how did he? Besides,
how did he get the money? How did he get money?
How did he get this way?
How did he get money? How did he get this way? Who was his friend? Who were his friends? Who was he hanging out with at different points in his life? Again, Dick Ebersol was his friend inside and outside of work. We haven't even heard that name on this. Dangerous
Danny Davis, not mine, but the other one. Not the Nightmare Danny Davis, but the referee from the WWF in the 80s, Danny Davis. Is he still around?
Why, was he a buddy of Vince's?
You never heard that deal?
No, I don't think I've ever heard anything about Dangerous Danny Davis, no.
I was told the story that was conveyed to me, and who was I to tell anyone any different since I wasn't even there, was that Danny Davis had gone to the military school with Vince and had at one point taken the blame for him for something.
Huh.
Or that's why he got a job as a referee, and later on as a ring crew referee, and later as a manager / wrestler fellow.
Well, yeah, never really a manager. He wrestled after. Well, it's a funny thing, and Johnny Valiant went to military school with him too, but obviously he's passed away. But Dangerous Danny Davis, now that you say this, he was a referee, then he became a heel referee, then he was suspended for life plus 10 years. And he became a wrestler, and if you think about the way he would strut around the ring and the way he would bump, he works like Vince. I'd never even thought of it until you said this. I got to go back now and watch it. Yeah. In my head, he moves around like Vince in the ring, and then he became a referee again. There was never really an explanation how that happened.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, he never worked, never had a job in any other wrestling promotion or company, did he? I mean, I guess maybe after his run, he would have done independence, or
maybe, I don't know,
or to get a signing or whatever. But it was not like he was in the business in the territory days bopping around. It was just that's what I was told. I'm willing to be corrected.
Like, even if you want to say, like, I want to know about Vince McMahon, like the romantic side, like Linda, anything you could tell us about him as a boyfriend, as a husband, things he did. There's nothing that explains who he is as a human being, unless it's nothing but WWE and WWF. That's his entire being. So I don't know. It's, there's more episodes to discuss, and we'll do that shortly, but there's a lot here, but there's not a lot here. There's like nothing here.
But there's everything's here.
Well, that is there, and we are here, and we will soon be there.
And we are all together.
We will return pretty soon with The Walrus, a.k.a. Episode 4. It's not called The Walrus, but we'll be back with Episode 4 right after this.